I really think that we need new leadership.
I would say I'm the only candidate with experience.
After a bruising fall election, Seattleites will see 6 new faces on the city council next year.
All right, clap. Be bold. Be bold.
This year, city leaders asked for and received voter support for a $970 million housing levy.
They must have somewhere to go.
On top of a $1.25 billion crisis care centers levy in King County. As 2023 comes to a close, what were some of the year's top stories?
You know, there's just that obvious voter frustration out there.
Our panel of reporters weighs in.
Labor money didn't really come into play.
Fentanyl has changed the conversation so much from 2016.
How has Seattle fared, and what's the outlook for the year ahead? Get the scoop next on City Inside Out. And I am joined by a terrific group of journalists to break down some of the biggest stories of the year, including David Hyde, a reporter for KUOW. David, good to see you.
Nice to be here.
We also have with us Hannah Krieg, who reports for The Stranger. Hannah, great to have you, too.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And finally, Greg Kim, a reporter for the Seattle Times, who has a specific focus on homelessness. Greg, good to have you here as well.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
All right, here we go. David, I'll start with you. One of the biggest headlines of this past year, of course, are city elections. We have a new moderate majority now in the city council. I think it's safe to say 4 incumbents did not run again. Councilmember Mosqueda is out, winning a seat on the King County Council. You recently profiled Councilmember Shama Sawant, the socialist alternative candidate who did not run again here. You make the point that she changed Seattle politics. And I just wanted to ask, was this election a rebuke of her politics? How do you look at that? How do you look at her legacy and the council we're going to have in 2024?
That's a great question. I don't think we know yet if it was a rebuke of her politics entirely. In terms of her legacy, I mean, I looked at the fact that she's had a real national impact. In 2013, when she ran, there were very few socialists running or winning anywhere in the United States.
If any, yeah, right.
She ran as a proud socialist, had folks telling her, you know, don't bring that up, don't bring that up, said, no, I'm going to bring it up. And now you've got, you know, over 100 socialists in cities across the United States. The other part that I think you're referring to has more to do with her style of politics, working with her Marxist political party, socialist alternative to champion legislation, grassroots activism on the streets, you know, starting with the minimum wage, but also bringing folks inside. So, you know, you can go back and look at all the council meetings where there they were, you know, cheering her on and supporting her legislation, but also denouncing the other council members whenever they would in any way disagree with any of her proposals or recommendations. And so I think that's the piece where, you know, is it going to stay with us? Well, she says that, you know, if there are issues that come up, her supporters will be there in City Hall. And that was a real change, you know, over the last 10 years from the more genteel style of politics that we had in the past. So I think that aspect of it is still with us, whether Seattle voters like it or not.
Yeah, and we will see what happens when these meetings start happening here. Hannah, I wanted to talk to you about something you wrote recently about the business dollars going towards these independent expenditure committees that supported many of the candidates who won here. Those business investments, I would have to say they seem to backfire in 2019 and the last state election, but they really seem to have an impact here in 2023. What was different this time around?
A big difference would be that their counterpart, like labor money, didn't really come into play in this race. And I think that's a lot about labor not really scouting for candidates in this election and sort of not getting a great return on investment from the current council. I know that, was it Local Here 8 or something, spent hundreds of thousands on Andrew Lewis, and then they didn't even look at him twice in this election. It's just like kind of, you know, gauging their budgets. They spent a lot of money on Lorena Gonzalez for mayor, and they have other projects that they want to work on. So I guess they just didn't want to play.
It was really interesting. And then no independent expenditures touched that District 6 race between Strauss and Hanning there. I thought that was very interesting that there were no IECs in the mix on that one.
Yeah. I mean, business and labor gave Strauss money. It seems like he's, you know, done a good job of appealing to business and sort of had some like pro-cop messaging, especially in his race. And they're like, maybe we don't need to take a chance on this new guy, Pete. Maybe Dan's just fine.
That's what him over the top, I think. Greg, I know that homelessness was a top issue in this campaign season. Yet again, it has been for many cycles now. I guess I wanted to get your take on this new council. Do you see them changing Seattle's approach to homelessness?
I don't think they'll take a super strong stance on the issue right off the bat. Homelessness is an issue that often takes council members some time to get up to speed on in terms of best practices, whether certain things work or not. So I can't imagine them changing a lot from what's being currently done right now.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how that goes because we have 6 new council members coming on, and that learning curve is steep. But let me stick with you, Greg, and maybe talk about another major headline this year regarding homelessness and the KCRHA, the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. Mark Dones, former CEO, resigned in May rather abruptly, and a permanent replacement has not been named as of yet. The KCRHA has had a lot of problems paying its bills on time. The structure of the organization has definitely caused some friction, too. I guess I just wanted to ask you, Greg, where do you think this agency is headed? Where is our region's response to homelessness headed?
Yeah, so just a reminder on what this is. This is an agency that Seattle and King County formed to try to tackle homelessness across the county. It's an agency that exists outside of either level of government. And as you said, they had a really tumultuous year where they saw their CEO resign. As you mentioned, like a lot of the nonprofit organizations that handle homelessness services kind of revolted in a way. They rebuked this organization pretty strongly. And so we've had a little bit of chaos there. And with this new CEO coming in, I think what Seattle and King County will really want to see is a little bit of stabilization of just can we run the day-to-day? Can we do the nuts and bolts of this?
Pay the bills, yeah.
Yeah, and we have this interim CEO. Can we pay the bills? Right. And this interim CEO is already taking that on in terms of trying to stabilize the ship.
Helen Howell.
Helen Howell, yeah. But she's just said that she's leaving, so whoever they bring on, I imagine they'll also be looking to find someone who has, that experience running a large organization like this, paying their bills, and I think they'll want to see more of that. Yeah,
and David, I guess I'll go to you. Mayor Harrell, the City Council, approved a plan for some more money going to the RHA for this year's supplemental budget. So Seattle wants to keep the RHA around, but I just wonder, some of the other cities in the region, some of these smaller cities have pushed back. Do you have some thoughts about the future of the authority?
We just got news, right, about Kenmore rejecting a Plymouth housing facility, which kind of suggests that maybe that approach, that regional approach, there are some question marks surrounding it and how much other cities are buying into it. I also kind of wonder who takes responsibility and sort of ownership for homelessness as it's kind of been farmed out to the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. Is it it's Mayor Harrell's city next year, it seems like, with a friendly council.
Sure.
So if things aren't going well, if we aren't making progress, does the city say, oh, it's the KCRHA, or does the mayor, does the council sort of own that issue now? I'm always a little bit uncertain now about, who takes responsibility for what happens moving forward.
Do you have any thoughts about the future of the RHA?
Well, I don't think, as you were saying, this is, Seattle's the only one who's really, not the only, but, the main buyer, you know? And I don't think...
Main funder, for sure.
Right. I don't think that, I always forget the acronym, so I call it KICRA, but I don't think KICRA is, safe with Seattle either, especially with this, more moderate council. I know a lot of the reasons that Dones left had to do with, tension with the mayor, and it's the mayor's city, 1,000%, as you said. And so I know the council gave KICRA the right amount of money that they wanted this year, but I know that there's just a lot of anxiety in that area of homelessness that maybe it's not going to get funded to the full extent next year.
Yeah, KCRHA. I like KICRA a lot better, though.
Right?
Hannah, maybe a related topic here. I wanted to talk about voters definitely wanting to put more money towards housing this year, supported a $970 million Seattle housing levy this fall. They said yes to a social housing measure, I-135, back in February, plus the City Council says it's making its largest investment ever in affordable housing, $600 million over this year and next. I guess I could throw in the yes vote for the crisis care centers levy in the mix, too. There was a lot of support for these different issues. I guess I'm seeing a lot of measures to consider, a lot of investments to consider, and I'm trying to figure out what impact are these investments going to have on our region's problems with homelessness and affordable housing?
I mean, it takes a while to build houses, so we won't know tomorrow.
Yeah,
but,
right.
I think, I think that it's going to take a lot more. I mean, all the studies show, I don't know, $10 billion. So
right.
it sounds like a lot
in terms of what's actually needed to meet the demand
for housing. But it's I mean, of course, $900 million sounds like so much money, and it is so much money. But in the scale, it's kind of like.
Yeah. Right. Does it really keep up with the demand? I think people saw that price tag go up for the housing levy, but in terms of prices of land and real estate, et cetera.
There are 3,000 housing units.
Right,
so it's
right. Not that much more than the levy did before. Did you have a thought on this one, David?
No, just that. Yeah, I mean, I think that there is this expectation now that we're going to be making some progress on these issues. And as you say, $1 billion, 3,000 units. There's also rental assistance.
Yes,
there,
right.
Right. So it's doing some important things. But, there's just that obvious voter frustration out there. And so I guess we'll see.
Yeah, for sure. Hannah, I want to jump back to you to start a discussion about a big debate over public drug use and drug possession. This was such a big issue this year. You can see it on your face there. So the council had this measure ready to go in June, and then Councilmember Andrew Lewis was a late no vote on it. Probably cost him his job there, led to a revamp to this version of this, a gross misdemeanor, the law that Lewis ended up working on. The council approved it in September. I guess I'm just trying to figure out this general move. Is the council going to get more tough on crime, and big air quotes on that one, with this new drug law in place? Or I'm trying to figure out what impact will it really have on our drug crisis?
Totally. I mean, the council is definitely getting more tough on crime. You see all those candidates who won, except for Morales, supported that drug bill, and the other ones either stayed quiet or didn't support it.
Right.
But I mean, the direction we're moving in is relying more on jails, more on cops to rid our streets of people going through a health crisis.
But does it rid us of the overall problem? No.
I mean, maybe you'll see that one guy who's down the street from you using fentanyl. He'll be gone for 3 days at a time while he's in jail, but then he'll come back all the more destabilized from going to jail and going through that process.
You're just not seeing a lot of investment in those, I guess, diversions or other things there.
$27 million, whatever.
Yeah, okay. Gotcha. Your thoughts, Dave?
Well, KUOW did some reporting on the new drug ordinance. Only 47 arrests, I think 33 diversions by the end of November. So, there was a flurry of activity when the thing first passed, but it's really kind of not being used, which is what some of the critics said initially, is that there wasn't money for treatment, and that this ordinance was kind of smoke and mirrors. I think it's a little bit unclear still, why that's not happening. Does the mayor's office need to talk to SPD and ask them to make it a bigger priority if this new council wants it to be a bigger priority?
Yeah.
And then, Sarah Nelson says she's going to, make drug treatment a big priority next year, but where's the money going to come from? So again, like most of this stuff, there's some questions that we've got about how
I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to come back to you on Sarah Nelson in a minute. But Greg, I wanted to draw you in because you recently wrote about safe consumption sites for drug users, which the city and county were both on board for and even approved some joint funding for. This was back in 2016. It seemed like a good idea then to local government. Do you see any appetite for that now in the midst of our growing opioid epidemic?
Yeah, before I touch on appetite for it, I will say, as we look at the drug crisis, which, our residents and voters are saying very clearly they want our officials to do something about, right?
Yep.
I think there are different goals that you can have when addressing the drug crisis, which I think our other panelists touched on, is, you can have a focus on the aesthetics of streets, on the priorities for, people who are not actively in the throes of drug addiction, right? And I think that's kind of where the police emphasis is geared towards, right? But as Hannah mentioned, that studies show that does very little, if not negative, impacts towards the people who are actually experiencing drug addiction. If you want to make a difference for the people who are, on the street, addicted to drugs, that takes a kind of different set of interventions. So to bring it back to your point, to your question, safe consumption sites is one way that other cities like Vancouver and Canada have tried to address the crisis for the people who are, experiencing drug addiction, right? And then back to your original question of like, what do I think the appetite is here? There was a big push in 2016 to add safe consumption sites. Everyone was like, yeah, let's do it. And they added money for it. That has fizzled out, and I don't know that the appetite politically has, somehow like burgeoned back up. I think a lot of those advocates have kind of seen the political appetite for it and said, well, you know what, there's not enough here for this. And so some of those people who were pushing for safe consumption sites have partially because of that, partially because they've changed their thinking independently because fentanyl has changed the conversation so much from 2016 in terms of the severity of the crisis, how often people have to use. They've changed some of how they think about what is the right approach to address the drug crisis for the people who are using drugs. For example, one of the things is Lisa Dugard, who was one of the main proponents of safe consumption sites back in 2016 through 2018. She said she no longer, pushes for safe consumption sites. That's not part of her thinking anymore. But one thing she does do is she runs some homeless shelters around Seattle, right? And at those shelters, they have sites like right outside where they have like a tent set up. And for people who are addicted to using fentanyl, the staff say, go use it there, outside, where we have a line of sight on you so you're not using alone in your room and have a risk of overdosing alone, right? And so, that's, in some ways, it can be viewed kind of as a safe consumption site, but she'll be careful to say that it is not, because she's saying that it is safe consumption practices wrapped around like a more robust set of like actually changing this person's life rather than just stopping them from overdosing and dying.
And Greg gets a points for the most comprehensive answer to a three-part question. That was well played, sir. I did want to ask you, David, you recently reported on this measure from Councilmember Nelson. She's been talking about possible involuntary commitment for people dealing with serious addiction or behavioral health issues. Controversial idea, to say the least. Do you see the city council pursuing this?
I have no idea. I mean, it is an issue that's coming up in some other cities, and this isn't sort of one flew over the cuckoo's nest type involuntary commitment. I think the cities that are exploring the possibility or have implemented, we're talking about people who are suffering from severe untreated mental health issues or severe kinds of drug addictions. But, as you mentioned, it's super controversial. I don't think it's going to be a top priority for Sarah Nelson. Again, it seems like her main issue is drug treatment, on that score. But it could be something that the city of Seattle actually talks about in 2024. And I would say a few years ago, it's something that was just completely so toxic. It was off the table. And so that kind of reflects the change and sort of the moment that we're in. We've got a lot of problems, and Nelson saying, maybe this is something we should consider. I'm not even sure how much of an advocate for it, though. She really is.
We will see. Could very well be a person who's going to be our next council president. So it'll be interesting to see.
Do you know something?
She guys maybe. I'm going to put a big maybe on that one. I want to move on to another issue, though. Hannah, let me throw you in here. Crime and police hiring. Major campaign issues here during November. City broke a yearly record for homicides back in September with just 3 months left in 2023. Police department wants to hire more officers. The city just launched a dual dispatch 911 program to help with those low acuity calls. The mayor pushed through this controversial plan for Shotspotter gunshot detection technology. Is there one of those that stands out as the biggest public safety headline of the year, or some thoughts on that?
I think the thing that comes up the most probably is the staffing shortage or the high expectations of the police department to have more cops than they've ever had before. But, I mean, I think that's going to be a huge conversation with the next council, since Sarah Nelson was such a huge proponent of hiring.
And all these candidates were saying, we're going to hire more tomorrow, and that's not happening anywhere in the country.
1,400 cops. Everyone you know is going to be a cop,
Okay.
What does it pay?
$80,000.
There's a $30,000 bonus if you play it right. I'm interested in that one, too. Greg, some thoughts about the biggest public safety headline of the year. Anything stick out to you there?
I mean, I know that there was a lot of noise made around the Shotspotter technology. I don't know if it warranted all the noise that it got. It's it's only like $1.5 million budget item, but it is controversial because I think studies have seen that maybe it's not effective, and maybe it exacerbates some inequities in terms of where policing attention is directed. But, you know, I think it's another example of like people are saying public safety is what we want our officials to do. And these are officials responding saying, look, we're doing.
Yeah, that's something they can point to. Any thoughts there, David, about the big public safety headline of this year? Anything stick out to you?
You know, just the reality is kind of grim. The homicide rate reaching sort of 1990s levels. I haven't done the math to figure out if that's per capita, but you know, high level of homicide rates. I did a story this week about car theft, and so, you know, this stuff can be sensationalized. You know, campaigns can sort of amplify the anxiety that's out there, but I think people across the political spectrum in Seattle are concerned about stuff like that, and want to see this next council figure out what to do about it. Right,
and do things like Shotspotter. I mean, just to have some sort of program in place. I feel like that.
I feel like, you know, voters don't have the responsibility of solving problems or knowing if they want Shotspotter or not. They're like, the homicide rate is unacceptable. It should go down. You guys have to fix it. You people have to fix it.
Right. Well, fair. We need to start wrapping up here. Hannah, I wonder if I could lean on you first. A headline maybe we haven't talked about from this past year, or one you're really keeping an eye on for next year.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big conversation next year will be around, and it was this year, but progressive revenue. Teresa Mosqueda had these big plans to get more taxes on wealthy people, corporations or whatever. Yep. And she kind of left that to the next guys. Yeah. And we'll see a lot of the people who got elected already have said, we're just going to like look at the budget for a while and see if we can shuffle some papers and, you know, find $250,000.
That's essentially what we're talking about. More than $200 million.
That's $250 million. Dang.
Right.
But so I think that'll be what we're looking at if we can do a capital gains tax or raise Jumpstart through the roof. So we'll see.
That's a big one. And you've done a lot of good reporting on that one. I'm looking forward to seeing more on that, too. Greg, maybe a headline we haven't talked about, one you're keeping an eye on next year?
I'll stay within my beat a little bit for this. What we got next year and with the King County Regional Homelessness Authority is they have about $200-something million that they manage. These go to homelessness organizations to do services, right? Starting next year, what they're looking at doing is redistributing that, right? Basically deciding from scratch where that money goes, right? Over the past so many years, I don't know, half dozen, they've just kind of rolled over. We've been doing the same thing. They've been going to the same organizations and the same amounts every year. And now they're saying, this is an opportunity for us to redirect that money in a way that we think is the most efficient and we can get the biggest bang for our buck and, you know, address equity and things like that and other priorities that the organization has. So it'll be interesting to see how they go about that.
With a new leader, potentially, too.
With a new leader, and it requires a lot of trust from a lot of different stakeholders, both the nonprofits that organize it and Seattle, King County. So it'll be interesting to see how this goes.
Thank you.
It's a big opportunity.
I appreciate that. David, a last thought here, a story from this year, or one you're really keeping an eye on next year?
I think I'm echoing Hannah's point. You know, next year, the big question for this council is they say they're going to not raise taxes. We've got this giant budget deficit that we're facing. We're going to hire hundreds of new cops. We're going to be paying for drug treatment. I don't know how all that stuff pencils out. And it'll be interesting to see kind of, are they willing to sort of, you know, decide that they are going to raise taxes and annoy some of their friends in the business community or not. And the voters are going to expect results. And so can we get results with, you know, within the current budget? I think that's going to be an open question and something we're going to be watching.
And with so many new council members.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure. Well, thanks everybody for your input here. Appreciate that. And everybody watching, thank you for your input too. What are people saying on social media about the year in review? One person writes, "Want a measure of the future? Look up Seattle elections. Moderates are angry and voting." Another person comments, "I'm sick to my stomach with the election results. Seattle is looking scary conservative so far, all across the board." We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on social media. I'm Brian Callanan. Thanks for joining us on City Inside Out.